the Madman! Welcome to the remaining neutral cards, Scourge Edition. I think 5 of these cards are going to likely make it into some sort of swarmy, undead, aggressive / mid-range type of deck, which wants to play cards early. We get to see some early undead. So let's jump right in with the undead card that's going to start it all. Arms Dealer. 1 mana, 1/2 undead. After you summon an undead, give it +1 attack. You know, the funny thing is sometimes when you're reading the card out loud, you realize that, wait a second, this card isn't what I thought it did. I thought the Arms Dealer was going to be getting +1 attack each time you summon an undead, but it's actually the undead you play, apparently, that gets the +1 attack. That makes the card a little bit worse, but it's still fine, still good. It's still good, it's still good. So yeah, makes sense that you'd want to play this on turn 1. It's a buffing card for the future undead that you're going to play. It is on summon, which means if you're a Death Knight, your Death Knight hero power does summon a 2/1 with Rush. Some of the cards reward you if one of your friendly undead has died since your last turn, so getting a turn 1 undead on the board is a long way towards that, and also could provide a pretty easy early corpse because the Arms Dealer is going to be something your opponent's going to want to remove early. Arms Dealer would be quite good if it managed to put an arm on the Foul Egg. Foul Egg. It's a 1 mana 0/2 undead. Death Rattle, summon a 3/3 undead chicken. The chicken is a cleverly named Foul, which is an undead beast. Foul Egg is actually rather good. It's one of the best eggs we've seen in some time. Really good stats for the cost. You just need to buff it, and it seems like swarmy undead decks, especially the ones from Druid, have a decent chance of being able to buff the Foul Egg. Druid is part of the Scourge team, and while we don't know a lot of Druid cards, they are the class with the wide buffs. Also, who knows, maybe the undead chicken, the fact that it's both undead and a beast, might actually double help out Druid. Banshee is a card that could buff that egg. Banshee, 1 mana 2/1 undead with Death Rattle, give a random friendly undead +2/+1. Fiendish Servant is an example of this card not really working out because it is too easy to clear off multiple cards, and then the card that buffs a card when it dies just doesn't go off. It's tough to play this card on turn 1 because a lot of classes have 1 damage hero power, and a lot of classes can just deal 1 damage. Then you just fall behind because you played a 1 mana 2/1. The success chance of Banshee, questionable. Vrykul Necrolite, 2/2/2 undead. Battlecry, give a friendly minion Death Rattle, summon a 2/2 zombie with Rush. This is like a primary example of why you want to have a turn 1 undead or turn 1 card played, because there's a number of turn 2 plays that depend on having had like a corpse be generated on turn 1 or an undead die on turn 1, or just having a card on the board so that you can play your Vrykul Necrolite and then get what is effectively a 4/4 for 2 mana. That's really efficient. This suffers from the same problem as Argent Protector, which is you need a 1-drop to land and stick, and the chances that you draw the 1-drop and you play it and it doesn't die from your opponent, it's like, it's not guaranteed. Now, the reason why Argent Protector may not be that insane is because Paladin doesn't have that many 1-drops, but this is neutral, so it can go into a lot of decks that do actually have more 1-drops. We got a kind of random grab bag undead here. Umbral Geist, 2 mana 3/1, Death Rattle, add a random shadow spell to your hand. This card is Mage's Starscryer, except instead of drawing a spell from your deck, you get to pull from the giant list of random shadow spells. There are some shadow spells from Death Knights, which have to deal with corpses, where if you're not a Death Knight, presumably you don't have a corpse mechanic. That would be an unfortunate shadow spell result to draw. There's a lot of variety in shadow spells, so just the fact that it's very random, unlike the Starscryer where you're always drawing a good card, probably is going to make Umbral Geist too random to include. We got a really interesting one here. Incorporeal Corporal. 2 mana 5/5 undead. After this minion attacks, destroy it. Now that's some stats for the cost. Don't sleep on this card. It's got some small similarity to Corridor Creeper, where Corridor Creeper used to be a 5/5. You had that song and little rhyme where, oh no, corridor creeper, it was a sleeper. As minions die, it gets cheaper. Well, Incorporeal is the hugely statted corridor creeper 5/5 pre-nerf, with already a pre-discounted 2 mana. Now, what stops it from snowballing is the fact that after you attack, this is destroyed. So this is meant less for a mid-range deck, or an aggro deck. It's meant for a control deck, or maybe a mid-range deck, and you don't use it to repetitively deal damage, use it in order to pretty much trade up. This card will trade into the opponent's 4-cost card, their 3-cost card, perhaps their 5-cost card. Maybe your opponent has to use a removal card on this one. The removal card, likely you're very happy they used it on your 2-mana card instead of your 4 or 6-mana card or 8-mana card. It's just like there's very little way to deal with this efficiently. You almost always are going to do a card for at least a card. Well, at most a card, really. You're usually trading this card for a higher quality card. Over on 3, we'll start with this Brittle Skin Zombie. 3 mana, 4/3 undead, death rattle. If it's your opponent's turn, deal 3 damage to them. Meant for an aggressive zombie deck, undead deck, certainly. If your opponent doesn't kill it, keeps dealing 4 damage. And if your opponent does kill it, well, that's nice that it deals that bonus 3 damage. It's been a while since we've seen such a ruthlessly aggressive deck, so this card might be a little bit of a sleeper, because if there was one, Brittleskin Zombie would likely fit in there. Dracaria Embalmer, 3 mana, 3/4 undead with Battlecry, give a friendly undead Reborn. This is the type of card that makes it into a lot of the early Swarm undead decks. You try to land a 1-drop and or 2-drop undead, and then you play the 3-drop, and then you give the undead a buff. Ideally, that undead has a death rattle on it, because then you can trigger the death rattle twice. The terrible result on this, which is you don't have an undead in play, is never that bad. It's a 3 mana, 3/4 undead. But obviously you're using this to hopefully target something. And this, I think, is a really big payoff for playing those undead decks. Nerubian Vizier. This card might be the best card of the bunch here. 3 mana, 2/4 undead. Battlecry, discover a spell. If a friendly undead died after your last turn, it costs 2 less. This card is borderline playable and might actually see some very fringe play if it just cut all the text after discovery spell. So already by default, this was fine. It compares to Vulpera Scoundrel, which is a 3 mana 2/3, discover a spell. Now Vizier, the fact that it has undead synergy by having the undead tag, and the spell could cost 2 less, that's a really big deal. This card makes you want to play undead. This card especially is good with Death Knight, because you can just use the hero power, create your 1/1 undead, send it into a minion, have it die, and then you can play Nerubian Vizier. And then your undead died. And you get the spell, it costs 2 less, nice. At 4 mana, there's Plague Spreader, a 4/4 undead, with Death Rattle, transform a random minion in your opponent's hand into a Plague Spreader. Interesting hand disruption tool. Probably would fit into a mid-range deck, theoretically. Face decks would find it too slow. Control decks and combo decks don't want their own cards to be transformed into Plague Spreaders. This card, in some way, against quite a few decks, makes them discard a card when this dies, because usually your opponent doesn't want you to transform another minion in their hand if they're a control or a combo deck. So it's a bit memey, and obviously bad stats for the cost, but may actually be an interesting tech card. Over on 5 mana, you got Infectious School. 5 mana, 5/4 undead with Death Rattle. Give a random friendly minion Death Rattle, summon an Infectious School. So this is Greybow, except neutral, and doesn't have taunt. There's basically no way that this is good, given that Greybow was really too slow himself, and that one had taunt, which is a really big deal with this type of effect. Without taunt, your opponent can just kill the other minions first, and then kill your pathetic little 5 mana 5/4. You got Tenacious Sandlane, 5 mana 4/6 undead, with lifesteal. Whenever this attacks, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. This is one of those minions that just falls into the category of not good enough stats for the cost, effect isn't big enough to make up for the lack of stats for the cost. No deck really wants it. Control deck would want to heal faster than this, since this is delayed healing, if it even heals at all. There's no way that an aggressive deck would ever want this kind of statage, and a mid-range deck, you know, you want better stats. We'll include this disappointment right after. Shatterskin Gargoyle, a 6 mana 4/6 undead with taunt and death rattle, deal 4 damage to a random enemy. I have no idea how this ended up costing 6. I'm not even sure this card would be good at 5. It's got very bad stats for the cost. But hey, don't worry, we got a really interesting card second to last here. Bone Lord Frostwhisper, a legendary 6 mana 6/6 undead. Death rattle for the rest of the game. Your first card each turn costs 0. You die in 3 turns. Wow, that's definitely the first time we've seen a card kill you, giving yourself a doom countdown. But certainly you can see how combo decks would be able to go off much easier if your first card each turn costs 0. You can play the big mana setup for the combo turn, and then like some other cards, and then do ludicrous amounts of damage. Cards that you might want to start off with this card would be like Kael'thas, you know, save your 6 mana and then play other things. You could do Kael'thas, Brand, Denathrius. After that, you could play Zola on your Denathrius, and then play a middle card, and then play Denathrius again. Then you will have a Denathrius in your hand just in case you didn't kill them, and you'll have triggered Denathrius's Battlecry effect 4 times. Your opponent better be dead by then. If they're not, you've got some issues. That might just be like too much setup though. The Bone Lord Frostwhisper Death Rattle is not guaranteed to go off unless you purposely kill off the Frostwhisper at the same time, at which point you're dedicating quite a lot of pieces to like a combo into just setting up the combo. There's some other interesting combos you can do. You can start with Alakir. You can play the criminal lineup in Alakir, create a bunch of copies of a big card. You got the Warrior Dream of Galvanger and double Faceless Manipulator. You got the general idea of like King Crush into double Faceless Manipulator. Basically, this card lets you make your memes not be dreams, except you die in 3 turns, and this might be just gross overkill because a lot of the combos were already adequate, like spending a full turn to set up before the combo, and then like if you fail to do the combo, you die. I don't know about that one. The main thing about being a combo deck and then playing something like this is I don't think you can rely on having Frostwhisper work. If you have an entire turn like pre-setting up the combo, it makes you very vulnerable. There's some disruption out there now. It's a big red target. It's like, oh, you die in 3 turns? Here, let's play Theotar, let's play Mutinous. Also, this would be a little bit weak if you needed this result to go off for your combo to work. And if you don't need this to go off for your combo to work, then why are you even including it? So I think it's a really cool effect, but you're probably going to see more bad beat stories of this guy getting evolved into a 6-drop, and then because that happened, they died in 3 turns. That's pretty brutal. And last and least, wow, is this card bad? Flesh Behemoth, 9 mana 4/8 undead with taunt, death rattle, draw another undead, and summon a copy of it. It's like, I don't really care if this card said dragon, it would still be bad. Undead don't have very high costs. Maybe we haven't seen the class that has big undead yet? Like, maybe priest? This card does provide a minimum of 2-for-1 value, because the Flesh Behemoth summons, it basically like draws you 2 cards. It gets one of the cards out onto the field immediately and draws you another one. So actually a 3-for-1 minimum, since your opponent has to deal with this card, but that's a very pricey tag for it. And it makes you want to have a deck full of heavy undead, and I'm not sure there's enough support for such a deck. But really cool that we got to see the undead side of the neutrals, and we see all the neutrals out. very early on, which does enable us to really build the Death Knight Undead decks pretty early. We can actually rate the Death Knight cards. This might be the fastest you ever see some card ratings. Coming up next, it looks like Paladins class cards are probably going to be the next class to fully get the cards revealed. Paladin and Death Knight actually share some similarities. So we're going to see if the holier version of the Knight manages to hold on to any advantages that it might have over the more deathly variant. Stay tuned.